Chris Place, you're very welcome to the Script to Story podcast series. And this in season 5, we're talking about the words we use. And before we talk too much about the words we use, would you like to let the listeners know who you are, how you came to this place in your life? Because you are the founder of the Galway Counselling Centre, but you had a journey to get to here. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely, Marguerite. It's Galway City Counselling. So we set that up, me and a colleague of mine, Vanessa, in 2011. We'd both literally just come out of our training in psychotherapy, and we wanted to start something together. And then it's just grown from there, I suppose. But I mean, I came to psychology quite late. I was involved in theatre and performance acting and stuff for a few years before that, and then went back to college as a mature student, did a degree in psychology in NUI Galway, and then went on and specialized in psychotherapy and trained in psychotherapy. So that's kind of the very condensed version. There was a whole lot more that led up to that. Life comes along and brings us on a journey. So very much the psychotherapy journey is very much a personal journey as well. So yeah, and I'm here. Now we're 2022, so I have a number of therapists working with me in Galway City Counselling, and we're still very small as an organisation, just plugging away. But yeah, lots of ideas for the future, lots of hopes, lots of plans, all of that kind of thing.
Well, we're the theme of this series is like the words we use, and we've noticed in the last while different words have come into our vocabulary between one thing and another with the pandemic. But also what we're seeing coming out of the pandemic is that a lot of people are suffering from anxiety, that a lot of people are struggling, anxiety and depression, that a lot of, we in Tribes Press would have a number of interns we get normally at this time of the year. And I noticed this year the interns are suffering more than last year. And I think the words we use is critical. How we communicate is often, I feel the communication is, a lot of the conflict in the world is down to poor communication. A lot of wars break out based on poor communication. What we think we're saying might not necessarily be what what we're trying to convey might not necessarily come out in the words that we use. And we're looking at that throughout this season. And I wonder from your perspective, because you're sitting with clients, you're listening to the words they use and how they relate to the world around them, to their environment. Have you found anything that's cropping up since post-pandemic or during the pandemic that was different than before it, or?
I think, if anything, maybe things have become intensified. I mean, certainly, if you think of cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, and one of the things cognitive behavioral therapy would posit is that our thinking, the distortions in thought, irrational thinking, when that's at play, so that's how we're communicating with ourselves, exacerbates anxiety and depression and so on. And I've been thinking a bit about this in terms of, because I suppose the idea I'm thinking of is that we often would see that threats to ourself, like our own self-worth or self-esteem, can create an anxiety reaction, a stress reaction. When the pandemic came along, there was a genuine and real threat to our health. Like, we had a pandemic, and this was something, a once in a lifetime event. Hopefully, certainly for us, for most of us, this was something that was quite profound. And the kind of ideas we have around mental health and mental well-being were certainly called into question, because I think all of us, regardless of our, of anything about it, we're all impacted by this. And obviously there was a huge kind of reaction to it, and some people were aligning themselves with an anti-COVID stance or whatever, and other people were much more had much more anxiety, I think. But the language that was coming out of that, and the thing of language has been, since I kind of got your email, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of language. And one of the things I've noticed with clients coming in to me is that they have an expectation that they should be doing better than they are. There's an expectation that I should be strong. On the one hand, we say in society, we have this idea of mental health. Let's talk about our mental health. And then on the other hand, we're saying we have an implicit idea of what that means. And really that means that you don't feel anything and that you're resilient and strong. So I have clients coming in saying, I clearly have problems. And I'm there, no, you're having a very human reaction to something. And, it's the same. I've been thinking about it as well in terms of, when this goes back to sort of humanistic ideas, Carl Rogers' ideas on conditions of worth. When babies are when young babies or young children, we'll often say they're very good. They're good kids. And usually that means that they don't feel, they don't express, they don't cry, and they're quiet. So they're good. So these are the kind of things we have. Now we have it as adults. We're told, you hear people will say to such and such, they were at such and such's funeral. The people there, God, they were awful strong. So again, that's another language we're saying that strength means you don't feel anything, that you're, and as a therapist, I would see the opposite. As a therapist, I would see,
actually, I have a cousin who died suddenly last Friday, and he's been buried tomorrow, and his wife found him dead in bed beside him, beside her. So it was a ruptured aneurysm. It was one of those things that ticking time bomb. It could have happened any time for him, but it was nice at least that he died in his sleep. But my father's response was, "She's a strong woman." And I was saying she'll be fine, But I said often the strong people can get through things, but that doesn't mean they don't feel that depth of emotional loss.
But it's even that for me, absolutely, there's a huge strength to be able to deal with something like, for all of us to have to go. My father died back in November, and it was sudden and shocking. Yeah, and likewise to you. But it's I used to chase my family around. I'd say, now remember, strength is expression, not repression. And I'd be chased around like annoying their heads, because for me, I see it. I see the impact of repression on my clients, on having to keep it in and having to fit some idea or some model of what strength is.
And I see that with the interns that we have with Thrive Express. We have interns at the moment, and I see that with the interns because we have interns and they have a task to do, we'd say, and they go missing for 3 days. And you're like,
they disappear.
You're wondering where have they gone and what's the story with the task, and they're not answering the emails or messages. We'd have a group messenger, so they're not answering that. So you pick up the phone, ring them, and haven't answered about 2 or 3 calls, and then you finally get hold of them, and it's pretty much what I try to get hold of them on is Zoom, because I can see their facial expressions, and it's always, for every one of them, they should be able to do this, but they can't get out of bed. They should be able to manage this. And I have no problem with people having a hard day or a hard month. It is really difficult for people at the moment. It's really difficult for students at the moment. And I wonder, are we saying something to young people that they should be a particular way? Because I see students are struggling now. They're really, really struggling. They haven't had any social interactions for 2 years, basically. College has been at home in terms of on their laptop. And I see that they're really, really struggling. And do we have as a society have an expectation on these young people that they're carefree and they've no worries? And is that expectation causing them to have more difficulties in speaking up and saying what they need, or maybe they don't know what they need?
There could be certainly that. I think that we're suddenly not even sure what our needs are all the time. We can often, one of the things when people come into therapy, they're saying, I don't know why I'm here, but I know that all is not well. And I think with young people, I think it's been an awful time, and it's very easy to kind of say, sure, look, they're grand and they're young and they'll be fine. Yeah. But that dismisses their experience, and it dismisses something. And that idea of should is really interesting, isn't it? Because I think should is an awful word. Like, it's an awful word. I should be able to do that. I see it all time and time again. There's a lovely technique in Gestalt therapy. I have a lovely word technique. So the often thing is clients will say, I can't do that. And I say, okay, look, I get that. Can you just change the word to I won't for a second and see what happens? And it's like, I can't do it to I won't do it. And there's a change in that word. That one word change can change the whole relationship to something. You
move from disempowerment to empowerment.
Yeah. You move to a place of choice.
Yeah.
I won't do it. Okay.
That's a very different way of you strengthen that.
It's real strength. And then at that point you might decide you will do it, but you have a choice in it. But if I go in and I say, I can't do it. I can't. Even as I say the word, I can feel it in my body. I can feel it. I'm small, So it's really interesting language and then when we have this idea of I should be able to do it, it's
very pressured.
Very pressured. You can feel it it feels like an oppressive force, coming upon me that I should have some answers. And for me, when I want to stay in bed when should is around the place. I want to pull the quilt over my head and say, I'm staying in bed. I can't. I can't do it. You're telling me I should.
I'm just wondering, because I think counselling is a great thing. I undertook counselling. I think that decade between my 20s and my 30s, I did a lot of work on myself, and it was the best thing I ever did for myself. The one decision I made that was the best decision I ever made in my life was to go in and look at all my flaws and all the difficulties I was having and change who I am. Now, there's still a little bit of a taboo about that, I think.
There is.
And I wonder, could we in some small way break it? If we were to say here now, what is it like to walk through that door to sit down as a client? What is that experience like?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I'm biased, right? In that I think crying is brilliant. I think expressing your emotion is brilliant. You walk in the door of my office, and the first thing you'll see is a box of tissues beside the chair. There's an invitation there to be whatever you are and to express whatever you are. So I'm clearly possibly an outlier, and I forget how hard it is to come in the door. I've done so many years of my own therapy. I've been in this world for such a long time that I forget how difficult it is to come in the door. But yet when you come in the door, it's not that bad. Like, it's actually pretty cool. You get to sit in a nice, comfortable chair. You've got this smiling face, or a smiling face like mine, bearded or not, who's saying, you're welcome. You're absolutely welcome here in the way you are right now. And you don't have to be anything else. I think there's huge value in taking the step to saying, I'm not okay at the moment. And huge value in that.
I think there is too. And I think there is the first step of a new you, you know, the first piece of that.
It's a transformational piece, you know, the coming in the door, just sitting down in the chair. I come from the school of therapy is that I'm absolutely not an expert in any sense of the word. I haven't a clue. I don't know, but I'm there because I want to meet you. I want to meet you as one human to another human. And it happens that in this relationship, I'm your therapist, but I'm no different to you. I have all the same challenges. You know, I get insecure, I get scared. I have a critic in my head. I have anxiety. I get depressed. I'm a human being too. And let's cast aside some of the expectations and the judgments.
Yeah. And I just to ask another question there, because if I'm a client coming in and sitting down and you happen to be there, or it might be male, might be female, whoever it is, and I don't know what to say. Is it okay am I supposed to know what to say here?
Absolutely not. Not at all. You're not supposed to know at all. Why should you know? And you just sit in the chair. Let me do my job.
Okay, so
I don't have to take the pressure off.
Just sit in the chair there. And that's okay for me to just sit down, because I don't really know what I want to say on the first attempt here.
I remember it's really hard, because one of the things can happen is I've worked with clients who'll have a whole list of things that they know and they're kind of like ticking off, and I'm like, okay, can you just put it aside? Like, you can do that, but what would it be like just to be here not knowing what to say? Because sometimes we have a very scripted idea, like it's almost like a manual of what we should do and what we should talk about and the things we should talk about. And the problem is it becomes quite a sort of restricted space then, and we don't almost allow the parts of us that we don't show to the world, or the parts of us that we keep even hidden from ourselves. They don't get to really have an expression. So I think it's really healthy to come in and say, I have no clue what to say.
And then I'm just wondering too, let's talk about language again. And what about if it's a case that I'm coming from a very different background to you, maybe, you know, you may be a city boy and I may be a country boy. At what point, like, what if I don't feel that you're getting me? What happens then for that client? What should that client do if they just feel that they can't connect?
Yeah. So I'll always say, like, one of the things I'll always say to somebody, I'll say, look, you're not going to be everyone's best friend. You're not going to be in a relationship with everybody. You'll get a sense early enough on whether I'm the right therapist for you, because this is a relationship between two people. And you might come in and I might remind you of somebody. Maybe I just don't get you. I don't understand your world. And there's real value in that. There's real value in saying, now, if you give me a chance, I might say, look, let's have a few sessions to see if we can develop something. And if we can't, that's okay. But I'll find it. Let me help you find somebody else who might suit you better.
Perfect. You know? So that's what I was wondering, because if it is that relationship, you just don't gel, and for no reason other than different personalities don't get on. And that's where I have met a lot of different people along the way who said, it doesn't work because I just couldn't, you know. So you're saying that no, it won't always work with the first therapist you meet. It might, and it mightn't.
It might, and it mightn't. And also, what I will say is the therapy isn't for everybody, and it's not for everybody, and it's one approach. And then even within the psychotherapy, there's a whole different approaches. So it all depends on, you might have it might suit you better to have somebody who's got an approach to working that maybe I don't have, or who comes from a different position that I don't come from, and that's okay. But ultimately, it's okay if you don't like me. Like, your job is not to please me. I'm okay. Like, I know I'm a good enough therapist. I'm good enough at what I do. I'm not brilliant at it, but I'm good enough, and I'm okay with that. And I've done a lot of work to get to being okay with being good enough. And in a way, it's like, but the main thing is that you can come in, and if you can have an experience of saying to somebody, you're not the right therapist for me, That's profound. Do you know, imagine to be able to come in and actually say, no, I don't want this. You know?
That is profound, because you can see a lot of people staying in something, like they stay in a lot of relationships that they've had to stay in at different stages in their life, and here they're doing it again. The pattern
I don't.
there.
The pattern is there. I don't want to let somebody else down.
Yeah.
I want to keep pleasing this other person in front of me. I don't want to let him down. And I always very early on say, look, listen, this is about this. Only can work. I mean, the research shows, if we want to get all scientific on it, and we break down to what helps in therapy. The kind of thing they call the common factors approach is that pretty much all therapies, whatever their theoretical persuasion, be it psychodynamic, cognitive behavioral, humanistic, that they all, there's a few key things. One is about 30% of it is based on the relationship, and 40% is based on motivation. Motivation being my willingness to do the work. Like, so if somebody forces me into therapy and say, you go into therapy or I'm leaving you, that's probably not going to be that useful, you know. Whereas if you're coming because you want to change, you want to figure out what's going on, that's a really useful starting point. And then the relationship. The technique and the theory stuff matters less, but the relationship is key. So if I'm the wrong therapist for you, if I'm not clicking with you and you just don't like me, or you're not, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's really important.
And I think that's a really important thing for people to know, that you know, you can win on your first attempt at the lottery, or you might not. It might take 2 or 3 attempts.
And you know,
and that's good for you to have the courage to say, I'm going to try this again. It might not work the last time, but I'm going to give it another shot with somebody else. I'm going to try again. You know,
I've worked with different therapists over the years, and having very different styles, and have learned so much from them in their different ways. And I've also worked with people where it just wasn't clicking, and I knew earlier on, this isn't going to work. It's just not happening. And that's okay as well. So yeah, it's really important that you feel a connection with somebody.
Just to say that as well, because sometimes the language we use can be so difficult for us to express. The things that are inside, the emotions that we have inside, can be so difficult for any of us to express in words. Some people are incredibly articulate, others are not as articulate.
It's
And how do I articulate that I'm struggling in a way that, do I have to have the language? Do I have to be able to speak the words that psychologists use? How do I express it? I think I'm depressed, but I don't know if it's actual depression. I think I'm anxious, but I don't know. But some people were talking about PTSD in the canteen today. So maybe I have PTSD. Maybe I should tell the therapist I have PTSD. I don't know what I should do here. How much language do we need to express?
Okay, so there's this idea of, I often think of that idea of being psychologically minded, and in a sense, to think psychologically about myself is a skill that I need to practice a little bit, do you know, and it isn't something that I'm going to know at the start. I mean, when I first started out, I didn't know the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist, do you know, I didn't know what they were, it meant nothing to me. So that's been a journey. So when you come in, the most important thing though, is just to come in and say, I don't know. I don't know what it is. That's a starting point. It's a really valuable starting point, because as a therapist, one of the tools I use is empathy. So I try to really get a felt experience of what that might be like, to not know how to find words to do that. And in that moment when I can bring observation to what it feels like to not know, that's the starting of getting to know.
And I think as well as therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists, whichever level you operate in, I think it's important that as they listen, that they learn your words, because there's no point in me speaking in my words if your words are what you need as a client to hear.
So as I work with lots of different clients with lots of different backgrounds or ages, backgrounds, vocabulary, different vocabularies. It's really important that I meet people where they're at. So if I just apply one model of therapy, one model of being, a sort of a manualized therapy approach, you know, this is how to do therapy, and I apply that to every client, that's not much use in my mind. So it's more about, can I meet the person where they're at? Can I, for some clients, we might have much more verbose kind of meeting of kind of intellects, this kind of stuff. And then for other clients, it's much more slow that right down and say, where are we at together? So it's really important that I do my job, and that's to meet somebody where they're at, that they don't have to meet me where I'm at.
And I think that's the key. I think that's the key for people who want to go into this. And I think people can always, when I think of my own father, I grew up with one foot in the city and one foot in the country. So my father were with farmers. He had a whole other language that I was in awe of, as a young child, looking up at my dad, talking to the farmer. It was a completely different language that he used with my mother, and a completely different language again that he used with other people that he worked with in his business world. And we all have a way of communicating that's different. And it's important to say that every therapist is trained to communicate in the way that works for their client, that they listen and they communicate. So people don't need to be afraid.
No, and the thing is, like, I'm really interested in meeting people as they are, you know, like sometimes clients will often say, so I need to change myself, you know, I need to be fixed. And immediately my reaction is usually something like, I don't know about that. Maybe just be more of you would be good. Because often, you know, the idea of fixing, the idea of changing it's making the assertion that we're broken in some way. And I don't come from that sort of school of thinking. I think that, you know, we have aspects of us that feel broken, but fundamentally it's about connecting to that idea that we're just waiting to meet ourselves, you know, and we just need to be given the chance. And
that thing of pleasing people, we've mentioned it a couple of times now, and I'm hooked on TikTok at the moment. So
I've been getting into it myself.
Stop! I'm hooked on it. But you see a lot of videos on TikTok where a man, like a young man, like a guy 18, 19, 20, 21, whatever, and approaches his dad, and he's recording on TikTok, and he's looking for his dad's approval, and you can see women too, young women looking for their mum or their dad's approval. You know, I have to say it's something I've never sought in life. I've never actually ever wanted or needed it, but it's something that's very much, it's alien to me because I've never had that sense. But I see it very much in the work that I do with people. So we have Tribes Press, we have a book, we publish books, and a lot of authors that come in, they're doing it for a parent that may have passed away or something, a parent or a sibling that may have passed away. They're doing it almost for their approval, even though they're no longer there. Or there's that piece where a lot of authors that I meet, it's some sort of approval that is needed. And I wonder, is this more common than we?
Yeah, I mean, I think. I think it's, sorry, it's like I'm in my head kind of going into lots of different places all at once. So it's, and I'm thinking about the idea of approval, because I know certainly as a man, and it's not just being a man, but like for me as a man, I know that I have felt that I have probably wanted approval in my life, you know, as a younger guy, feeling quite insecure, maybe wanting to get validation in some way. I think certainly people who work in the arts will often be able to say, yeah, sometimes, you know, you're doing a show, you want somebody to tell you that you're good at it, you know, because we often have a voice in our head that tells us we're not. And we often have this internalized voice along the way that says we're not good enough and that we're useless and that we're rubbish. And so we can often, as a way of dealing with that, reach out to the world, constantly looking for validation in some way, because deep inside we just feel we're not worthwhile. And the work of therapy in ways is really to help develop a compassionate mindset for the self, you know, a compassionate voice that can actually be in our corner, so that we're no longer, we're for us, not against us. And so,
and that compassionate voice, what, so I'm a man or woman, I'm struggling at the moment. I think there's nothing out there for me once I finish my degree or whatever it is. It's been tough in the last couple of years. Like I really feel terrible about who I am. I really feel I made the bad choices in the subjects I picked for my degry. I really feel that I'm not going to have anything coming out of this, and I don't know what way my life is going, and spiraling downward with all of those thoughts.
So
how am I compassionate?
Well, for me, the word compassion, it's be very simply going, that is really hard, isn't it? It's really hard to be in a place where I feel I've picked the wrong subjects. It's really hard. It's really hard to be in that space where I think that I've done all of this wrong. That's really hard, isn't it? And by even that little bit there, that's really hard. That's very different than saying, I'm such a failure. It's actually a voice in our head saying, this is really painful at the moment. It's not saying that, it's not about, oh, you don't need to worry about it, or you don't need to, because that's not the case. I am worried about it, but it's just bringing a sort of softer mindset that says, yeah, it's really hard. How can we make this better? How can we find a way to support you in this? I have this idea that we're made up of lots of different parts of us. And that we've got, part of me might be really small and scared and vulnerable. Another part of me might be quite strong. Another part of me might be quite funny or whatever. And I have these different parts. And often what happens is one part's the most is really strong. So I feel really useless, small, no good. And that's what I feel. And it's kind of like, okay, so that's how you feel right now, but that's not all of you. That's not all of you. You might feel like that's all of you, but it's not. And we're going to figure out together how we can meet the other parts of you, how we can bring more of a sort of more of a kinder, inclusive voice or something, So I think compassion is very much about saying.
So I can hear the compassion in your words there. So I can see how a person can become compassionate by even the slightest little shift in thinking.
And it's compassion and self, all of that. Compassion is a kind of it's kind of big at the moment in the sense of like because I think we're so critical of ourselves, and that compassion isn't so much about saying I don't have to take responsibility. It's absolutely the opposite. But I do need to be responsible for myself and the world. I absolutely do. But I can do it with kindness and acceptance. And I
think because I would have worked with a lot of people with addiction, and I think compassion. I think compassion is huge in recovery because
absolutely.
There's so many mistakes made along the way that without that piece of compassion, it's very hard to recover.
Well,
to move forward without falling off.
I mean, I'm 50 years old, turned 50 a couple of weeks ago. And have I done everything right? Absolutely not. Have I made mistakes? Yeah, look, plenty of them. Should I be, because of that, should I just write myself off? Should that be it? That's it. I've made mistakes. I failed at certain things. Therefore, and it's like, well, there's a lovely CBT visual exercise. This can be really useful sometimes. So it's like, have you been successful at everything you've ever done? Everything you've ever done. And most realistic has backfired a couple of times where someone says, yeah, you have. I'm like, really? You're not supposed to say yeah. You're supposed to say, well, no. But so success would be like lots of little zeros in one box. And have you failed at everything you've ever done? And you typically the answer is no, because you got here on time today. So you haven't failed at everything you've ever done. So failure would be all X's. And then you've got this other box, which is X's and O's, lots of X's and O's. And that's being a human being. So being a human, we're going to fail and we're going to have successes. That's just the nature of being a human. So I think often the time we have to remind ourselves again and again that we're human beings. That's it.
Yeah, and I think the expectations we often place on ourselves are too high. And I think our education system it doesn't help young people because you have to be right. There's a right answer for everything. It has to be right. And then when you meet people later on, they expect themselves to be correct all the time, or there's trouble.
Yeah. So I have a line that I'm conscious I'm speaking to a publisher at the moment, so I'm kind of saying this will be in my future book.
Okay, great.
No, it's, don't
forget Try Spread.
Yeah. Try. That's what I'm saying. I was doing, okay, Try Spread. I'll come out. You'll hear from me again. But it's this like perfection is an illusion for the deluded. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. But we've been told all the time, social media, in right across the board, we've been told what perfectionism looks like. How we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to speak, how we're supposed to think, how we're supposed to feel. And it's hard. And young people especially, like it's different. Like, okay, you were saying you're into TikTok. Like I am too, but I'm like most of my life I wasn't. For half of my life, I didn't know what social media was. There wasn't social media. I was doing adult literacy tutoring. I was working as an adult literacy tutor. So I must have been in my mid to late 20s when I got my first email. I mean, there are more people who've been born in the 21st century have no concept of what it is not to have a mobile phone or not to have a Facebook account or Snapchat or whatever it is. They're firsthand being confronted all the time with these images of how I should be in the world and how I should look, how I should behave. That's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure on industry. I think industry needs to take on a bit of that pressure because if you have a responsibility, I often think you have a duty of care to the people that you market to as well.
I mean, there's something about that idea. I remember I did a lot of workshops in the university and kind of resilience workshops. And it was that idea of like, what is resilience? And it was around self-compassion and connection and positive self-awareness. And these were skills, so you're kind of having to sort of, but one of the things I remember coming up was like, what we do not want to do is, we're not really about trying, like, because often in university, there's a lot of pressure being put on from the university, assignments to do and exams and this and that. So just on the one hand, we're saying, let's be kinder to ourselves. And then on the other hand, our society is saying, you're rewarded if you do well. So there's a conflict there. So the language that we use, on the one hand, we're saying, be kind, be compassionate. And yet we're also saying that your value is based on how well you do. So there's a conflict there. And as a young person or as anyone, we can be going, it's a bit of a lip service. So we don't want to, I'm not interested in helping people. What's the word? Like if society is sick, it's not people who should be changing to fit a sick society. It's society that needs to change. Do you know?
Yeah, I understand. It's
I
just
don't know
how
if
do
that
you
makes
change
sense.
it? It's just
I
how
don't
do you
know
change
either.
that society?
I don't
That's the
know.
problem.
That is the problem.
But I
But
suppose
guess,
we could all start with compassion towards ourselves. And if we
yeah,
can learn a compassion towards ourselves, we can learn to have compassion towards somebody else.
yeah. And the more compassion spreads, in my mind, it's as you said at the start of this, you know, I mean, war and the horribleness stuff that's happening right now, like right now today, you know, that's this absence of compassion and awareness and respect. It's just the absence of that.
Yeah. We could talk about narcissism. We could talk about so many other things
absolutely,
after that.
all of those things, and psychopaths and
it's an interesting, it is a beautiful thing for a person to take the courage to step inside the door of counselling. You are Galway City Counselling, you're the startup, and now you have so many more therapists there with you.
We have a few more, and we're building, and the idea is that we'll have student therapists working with us, building up their hours, and we're going to be running more groups and sort of psychoeducational groups, and you know, groups for therapists and groups for, you know, so that's to go into that sort of training piece as well, because I think group work is really powerful.
And if I'm
working with people,
if I'm a person, I do think group work is extremely powerful, because if you sit with your peers, if you sit with somebody else and they're feeling what you're actually feeling, you don't feel so alone.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'm just wondering, so if I haven't listened to this podcast, I want to go to Galway City Counselling. Where do I find you? How do I get in touch?
Well, we're on the internet. That's probably the main. I mean, you just key in Galway City Counselling into the internet, and
you're there.
Come up. We're there, and then you know, like one of the big, I suppose, the big issues for us at the moment is there's only a few therapists, so it fills up quite quickly. So so the idea of growing is to have more therapists come on board, and that's the hope. And when we do that, you know, that idea then that we'll have more, because often you're saying to people, look, I've no availability at the moment, and so you make this first step to come for therapy, and then the person's there going,
6 months
I don't have any availability. Yeah, it's horrible. That's just like, right, that's not helping me. So, and this is one of the problems with therapy at the moment, is the demand has never been so high since the pandemic. The need for something like I mean, I think the impact the pandemic and all this other stuff is having on our well-being and our psyche is it's a lot, and we need more people who can do this work, and we need more resources and all of that.
And I think that people often say this, the queues are so long, the waiting lists are so long to get into therapy, and I often think, well, until you get in that door, what can you do for yourself right now? So, you know, how can you mind yourself?
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, I think that's, so I think, you know, I actually think listening to podcasts, to be honest, is an amazing thing. Like, because I set up a podcast called Therapy Talks during the pandemic, and my big thing was that I wanted to take therapy out of the therapy room. You know, like that it's not just about coming and sitting in front of somebody. You know, like, so I'm interviewing like people who climb mountains or swim in the sea or do whatever for their head and for their well-being. And so it's listening to podcasts, listening to the ideas, reading books on self-compassion, for example, or, you know, it's and it's actually, or journaling, you know, so many different things we could do, or even sitting down and breathing for 5 minutes in the day, and going for a walk and staring at nature. There was a lovely interview with Tony Bates on the radio about it was 6 months ago, and he was talking about this idea called the I walk. And so he'd said that what they've done is they've got people to go for a walk, and the first one group of people had to go and solve a problem, you know, problem solving task they had to do. And when they got to the end of the walk, they had to take a picture of themselves, like take a selfie. And in the other group, they were called, like, they had to look at the sea or look at nature and look at the birds and just really become aware of what they were seeing. And then they had to take a picture at themselves. And what they found is the problem solving group, it was really, the picture was mainly them and a little bit of the background. And for the group in the I walk group, they were featured very little in the group. They were just small, and it was this beautiful vista, and it was like all of nature and them a little bit.
And there's the power of something else. I have another thought in my mind from the previous podcast that I've just recorded earlier today, but I can't go into it because we've gone way over time. And this is, listen, thank you so much. This will be edited, unfortunately, but it was fantastic talking to you, Chris. Hopefully we can speak again. So if people want to get in touch with you, you're the Galway
City Counselling, yeah.
And look it up online.
Look it up online, and just, I know I can be administratively horrifically bad sometimes, so I get back to you. It just might take a bit of time. Be patient.
Okay.
Anyway, listen.
Well, thanks very much for being part of this.
Thanks a million.
And wishing you the very best in going forward. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.